Okay, we're recording. We're ready to go.
Okay, this is Patty Richards, and I'm calling the meeting of the Vermont Community Broadband Board to get to order on this Monday, November 28th. The time is 12:03. I'm going to make a motion. We have an agenda in front of us. I'm going to make a motion to approve the agenda as listed. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Discussion. The only discussion that I would like to raise is Laura has made some suggestions for the data policy. If we can get to that before she has a 12:30 conflict, we can take it in order. But if we cannot get to that by 12:30, then I'd like to push that to a later time so Laura can join us.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think it's pretty clear cut, and of course we don't have any issues with Laura's suggestions. But
yeah, let's not debate it right now, though.
Yeah,
Christine, let's wait for.
Yeah, I was wondering. I'm just trying to figure out if we can get it done by 12:30. Do you want to change the agenda? What do you recommend, Patty?
I'm hoping we can just move through the minutes and then hop right to it.
Okay.
Okay, all those in favor of the agenda as listed, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. For the minutes, unless want to do a roll call, that board members present are Brian, Dan, Laura, myself. Holly is yet to join. All right, so first item on agenda is approval of the November 14th board meeting minutes. I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of those minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, minutes
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Okay, all right, Dan is abstained. Approval of minutes carries. Next on our list is the VCBB data and overbuild policy. Christine, do you want to tee it up or do you want to go right to Stan?
Yeah, I'll tee it up. I just want to make it clear to the board that we had a number of conversations with the VCUDA and the CUDs, and what you have in front of you is been fully vetted with the CUDs and agreed upon. So I'll turn it over to Stan at this point to do the presentation. Go ahead, Stan.
Hi, good afternoon. You have in your packet the policies regarding mapping and service data and overbuild, which in our discussions have come out to be very important discussions for important policies for the board as well as for the CUDs. So we wanted to make sure we got this right. We've discussed it a few times in the past, and I think this draft that you have in front of you addresses a lot of the concerns that folks have raised in the past. Would it be helpful if I pulled up the policy on my screen, or should I just walk through it verbally?
I think it would be helpful to pull it up, Stan.
Okay.
Let me see, Holly has joined us. Hi, Holly. So just let the minutes reflect that 12:07 Holly joined.
Great. Can you all see the draft?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so the policy objectives we just set out at the beginning are to specify the data the VCB can consider in making grant decisions, how the VCBB evaluates changes to proposed eligible addresses to be funded by a grant, and recognizing the broader goals of Act 71 and the VCBB's role in supporting the long-term sustainability of grant-funded projects. I just think I will just quickly go through and you know, we all know the background here. Served is defined in Act 71, and the grant program is also defined. Data is needed for two purposes: to determine the set of addresses that must be included in a universal service plan, and addresses that are eligible for construction grant funding. So as discussed in the past, we begin with the PSD's broadband data map that's available online. But we have in previous by previous acts, the board has said to not include wireless data. And also, we note that providers provide this information to the PSD voluntarily and may have incentives to report possibly incomplete data, or and there are no penalties for reporting incorrect data. So we wanted to have some sort of program whereby the VCBB could be informed by additional data from the CUDs or from others. And we look to the three-prong test in Act 71, Section 8086F, that a project be a cost-effective method for providing broadband service, any overbuild be incidental, and before awarding a grant, the board makes a reasonable effort to distinguish served and unserved locations within an area. Some additional analysis about each of these three prongs is cost effective. The board must determine whether a proposal is an effective use of grant funds to reach nearby areas that aren't served, keeping in mind the goal of universal service and the need for a sustainable business plan. This analysis underscores the importance of having accurate snapshot at the time that considers locations actually served, unserved, and underserved. Prong 2 requires that any overbuild be incidental. Incidental is not further defined in the Act, but I looked in the dictionary, and incidental means accompanying but not a major part of something, or liable to happen as a consequence of something. So in using this, you name the concept, the board must find that overbuild is not a major part of the objectives of a universal service plan, or that it's liable to happen as a consequence of the build. Prong 3 requires the board to make a reasonable effort to distinguish served and unserved locations within an area. Act 71 does not further define this responsibility or provide authority for the VCBB to compel data from providers. But we interpret the provision to mean that the VCBB make a reasonable effort to recognize and consider known or probable service extensions or upgrades in its consideration of a grant, and to inform the applicant of any such known or probable extensions. The VCBB can make a reasonable effort by considering mapping data as described in the data policy. In addition, 8086G provides a test that a broadband project demonstrate an economically sustainable business model that ultimately will be eligible for financing in the private or municipal bond market. In the construction grant process, this intention is addressed by the requirement that the board determine each applicant have a business plan and a universal service plan before awarding the grant. The business plan, as is required by the grant application process, shall include but is not limited to a whole bunch of requirements, including high-level engineering and design plans, market analysis, take rate assumptions, cash flow positive data, loan payoff date, etc. This requirement applies to all eligible applicants. So based on this analysis, we've come up with a policy that the VCBB use as a starting point the most recently released as constructed PSD data, focus that data exclusively on wired connections, any address where the only service that meets or exceeds 25.3 and is wireless, where the only service that meets or exceeds 25.3 as wireless shall be a mandatory inclusion in a universal service plan and deemed an eligible address. When considering a grant application, the VCBB may consider factual as-built information provided by applicants or providers that corrects or supplements this data. 4, the VCBB must make a reasonable effort to recognize the cost of reevaluating data, construction plans, and business models each time new information becomes available. Second, the overbuild policy must meet the 3-prong test. It must be a cost-effective method for reaching nearby or underserved areas. Any overbuild must be incidental to accomplishing the overall objectives of the Universal Service Plan. And in analyzing overbuild, the board must make a reasonable effort to distinguish served, unserved, and underserved areas within a district, including analyzing the data from the PSD maps and any data presented by applicants, providers, or those similarly situated that contradicts, augments, or otherwise conflicts with the data. Inclusion of funding in a construction grant for such overbuilds shall be based on reasoned interpretation of the as-built data as described above. The VCBB shall document its findings of the situation at the time of the grant in the award documentation. In addition, we thought it would be helpful to provide applicants with guidelines regarding incidental overbuild. These guidelines are largely derived from information that we had included previously in the RFP. And it talks about, point-to-point fiber that must run through a served area to served, unserved, or underserved locations, or as a cost-effective alternative. It gives some examples. Grant applications must be prepared to demonstrate why overbuild is incidental, including an analysis demonstrating how it's a cost-effective way to reach these locations, or an analysis of how the overbuild is incidental. A fiber line that doesn't serve any underserved addresses and has drops is considered overbuild. The most cost-effective method to connect unserved or underserved areas is not overbuild. In all cases of overbuild, the CUDs must account for the potential presence of competition in their business and construction plans. And finally, nothing in these guidelines precludes a CUD from using funds from other sources outside the construction grant program to equip and serve drops in any area in the CUD's district. CUDs will need to accurately track the use of funds from other sources to clearly delineate where grant funds versus non-grant funds are spent in the district. That is a summary of the policy, and I'm happy to answer any questions or elicit any discussion.
Okay, thank you, Stan. I'd like to go to Laura first because she has to bow out at 12:30. So Laura, can you jump in quickly with your edits? Comments?
Yes. Yep. Thank you. Thanks for all the work on this and for the going back and forth with the CUDs. It definitely appears to have a lot of good thought and work involved in here. My comments, as I let the board know and VCUDA know prior to the meeting, are around the purpose of the VCBB. And while that is not necessarily an obvious problem with the rest of the policy, it could actually make a difference, I think, when we think about cost effectiveness and the purpose of our work, whether or not we are dealing with community broadband or not may be a factor in cost effectiveness, which we don't have in here. So I have suggested a couple of changes under the objectives, and I'm trying to get there, and under the Let me get to it. Actually, a change. It's probably easier for me to get this through my email. Under the policy objectives, the policy recognizes the broader goals of Act 71 in establishing, looking to send the email that I sent you. Third bullet under the objectives, to insert the words through acceleration of community broadband solutions after the words universal service. So that would then say that the Vermont legislature enacted Act 71 with the goal of achieving universal access to reliable, high quality, affordable, fixed broadband through acceleration of community broadband solutions. And then under the background section in the first paragraph. Also, after fixed broadband, inserting the same statement. So the Vermont legislature enacted Act 71 with the goal of achieving universal access to reliable, high-speed, affordable, fixed broadband. I'm sorry, that's what I read as that's the first one that I read. So under objectives, it would be this policy recognize the broader goals of Act 71 and establishing universal service through acceleration of community broadband solutions and the VCBB's role in supporting the long-term sustainability of grant-funded projects. So I just think that it's important to, whenever we are stating what our role is, that we are clear that it is to support the acceleration of community broadband solutions, which is very clear in Act 71. So I would like to see both of those changes made in under the objectives and background. Again, it doesn't seem obvious to change the whole policy, but there's a difference in terms of what we're doing, I think, and how we might interpret things, whether or not our goal is simply connecting people or if our goal is accelerating community broadband solutions. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. Holly, you have your hand up.
Would you like to vote on that change while Laura's in the room?
Do you have other changes to the policy though, Holly?
Probably.
I don't want to take action until we have all our changes.
My comments then are around the every time one makes a policy or presents guidelines, there's the potential for unintended consequences. And first of all, I do think that, Stan, you've done a marvelous job to clean this up. If you've found common ground with VCUDA and the CUDs, that's wonderful. I have the following questions for my colleagues, though. When we talk about cost-effective, one of the most cost-effective things we can do is to run fiber through highly populated areas. The only problem is that that's not necessarily efficient. It might be incidental when you look at the scope overall of universal service, but it certainly isn't necessarily efficient in terms of point A to point B, but it would possibly be very supported by a business plan. I'm asking the board to consider whether we need more language around what cost-effective means, because of course, any business plan that projects additional revenue from going through an overbuild area with the assumption that it will generate additional revenue on the system could be, just shielding the cost in an attempt to make competition. We've seen applications come to us with that exact scenario in place. I do think the term incidental, as it's presented in the three-prong test, in prong 2, should take on greater meaning The board, of course, is not bound to the description of the Oxford Dictionary, but rather could assist its policy statement in identifying incidental as efficient or direct in accomplishing the objectives of universal service. I think that's different than saying that it's simply subject to a business plan. And my third question goes to the data discussion, which talks about the VCPB must make a reasonable effort to recognize the cost of reevaluating data. Who are we directing here? Are we making a policy telling ourselves that we have to do something here? I'm just a little bit confused. I'm looking for staff to enlighten us. So this is a question as to whose burden it is to identify what the service status is at these households. I believe the burden is on the CUDs. So that's a question. But I think it goes to, what are we trying to say by bullet point 4? Where are we supposed to recognize the cost? I mean, like, recognize it how?
Okay, so Holly, you brought up a couple of things, and before we move to bullet point 4 in the data policy section, I just want to point out that the reference to in 8086 that's in this policy before us for cost effective, overbuild is incidental, and the reasonable effort, section 1, 2, and 3, those are right out of the legislation. So,
Yeah, I know they are.
Yeah, so I think rather than define them here via this policy, I think the policy stands as is, and as we go along, and we make decisions regarding applicants, then that flushes in. It's kind of like the law states one thing, and then lawyers interpret cases according to the law. I think that gets vetted out as we go. So I would not. I think the
Actually, I'd like to disagree with you directly. The point of a policy, yeah, the point of a policy is in fact to give additional interpretation to the law. And so that is not necessary. That's in addition to whatever additional practice or procedure evolves over time. So this is the time and the place, Patty. If we were to try to defense against any misconception of what cost effective means and how it is bolstered by a business plan, this is the place, this is the time.
Did you have specific language you wanted to suggest then, Holly?
Yeah, I think that the I gotta scroll here. I have to get out of the guidelines. Hang on a second.
Okay.
Where this is stated as our policy, the overall objectives in point 2 include business factors in providing universal service to the district, including a workable business plan that shows an efficient, I would say, an efficient distribution of service to reach all unserved and underserved addresses in terms of cost of grant-funded resources.
All right, I'm gonna raise my hand and say I don't know exactly where you are in the policy.
Okay, so section 3, overbuild policy, right? This is the part that talks about the 3 bullet points, and it's on page 15.
For packet?
Of the packet.
Okay. Trying to pull this up here too.
It's page 15 in the packet.
Yeah, go ahead.
So then if we look at, do you see any overbuild policy must meet the 3-prong test?
Yes.
Okay. The second, number 2.
Yep.
The second sentence of number 2 says overall objectives include the business factors in providing universal service to the district. And so the first sentence says it has to be incidental to accomplishing overall objectives. Okay. Overall objectives include business factors in providing universal service to the district, including a workable business plan. And what I'm trying to point at, I'll offer you language in 1 second. I'm trying to say that a workable business plan could be the basis on which we justify an overbuild that might not otherwise be necessary, or extend an overbuild that might not be otherwise necessary. So my remedy for that is to say, including a workable business plan that does not create additional infrastructure costs and is an efficient means of connecting unserved and underserved addresses. I mean, this is the problem I'm having is that the only thing we're talking about in that clause that comes after plan is the general business. It's a necessity to reach all unserved businesses in the district, and we need to be specific about it's required to or efficient to serve to connect the system between un or underserved addresses. I believe that this clause about the business plan being the only categorization of whether or not the overbuild is incidental is as big as a barn door to suggest that we grant fund overbuilds to make network deployment more cost effective based on projected take rates in overbuild areas.
Okay, my head is going to, given the words you put out, it would be really helpful to see this all on paper. And the other thing that I would like to do is make sure that the CUDs have time to react to it to see if they have concern. So my suggestion here is that we take any edits to this today, put them into a red line version, circulate that to all of us, including Vikuda and the CUDs, and let's get feedback on that to make sure we're all on the same page.
Fair
take
enough.
Edits, take Laura's edits, put it in a red line version so we can all see it and digest it.
I'll work with Stan to do that, and I'm apologize, but with the holiday, I could not do that in advance.
Yeah, sorry. Christine, does that work for you on your side?
Yeah, except I want to make a point that, I don't know how much detail you need to go in with the overbuild, because one of the things that we do is we review the designs to ensure, this really gets down. I'm not sure you can put this, a policy fixes this. It really fixes it in terms of the design review. We look at the designs to ensure that the CUDs are taking the most direct route possible in order to get to the underserved and unserved. So, with the idea that they're taking the most direct route possible, then, that kind of eliminates the possibility that they're going to be routing something in a, doing something nefarious in terms of how they route their fiber optic.
Christine, I don't mean to suggest CUDs ever act nefariously, but they do act rationally to try to bolster income. So that, and we don't have a policy that has that aspect of your review embedded in it. That's why this should be no problem, right? If this is what you're doing anyway.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a problem. I think it's just, all right, so make that, put the changes in there, and we'll go through the process again and review this again in January.
Okay.
Okay,
that
and
would be
Patty,
helpful.
I had that one other comment, and really, I recognize that the statute makes it the board's job to determine what's served and unserved. And I'm just torn a bit because I don't think we've clearly identified where we're coming from on that, and who's going to supply us the information and how we're going to get there. That brings me to raise that other question about number 4.
What page are you on?
And now I'm on page 15 still, the last,
Got it.
wait a second. I've screwed myself up here. Not that number 4. It is page 14, number 4 under the data policy. I don't understand what this means. Maybe Stan, you could enlighten me.
I believe this was something that the CUDs wanted the VCBB to acknowledge, that it costs money for the CUDs to evaluate data every time that new data is published. That they have to redo their business models, their construction plans,
But do you understand? Do you believe that by this policy, we're asking them to do that? Because I'm confused on that. When we have an overbuild and it's in a grant application, it is a point in time.
Yes.
And you're saying in order to move the data forward from the original PSD data, and this is not specified in this data policy, I have always believed that we were acting upon the USP data that was available in 2020. And this policy does not clarify that. Every time the PSD changes its data, we're then going to have to redo our benchmarks or refigure where we are in our quest to do our mission. And so
it's more that the CUDs will come with amendments or additions to their plans. And at that time, we have to do, as a snapshot in time, look at the more current data.
So you're saying subsequent grants?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Patty, then my recommendation is that we should use this opportunity in time regarding the data policy. At number 1 on page 14, to acknowledge that we are using the PSD data as existed in 2020, subject to it being updated by the grant applicant.
So, okay, what I think is the best approach here is to put this in writing.
Yep, I will do that.
That you and Stan, if you and Stan can kind of work through.
You should know that I have spent an hour or so with Stan already on this, but I will do that again. And the other thing,
I definitely want to challenge that. I don't know how you could do a sustainable business plan based on a 2020 model, that changes annually. if a sustainable business plan is clearly required by Act 71. In good conscience, I would not be able to say we're doing a sustainable business plan if we base it on 2020 data.
But we're saying, Christine, that it would have to be updated for each subsequent grant application.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the minutes. I mean, I will show you that we had this discussion and we decided we would use the updated data on an annual basis. So that's, that would be a change based on what the board said in the past. And I'm pretty confident I can demonstrate that. But I would tell you that's an unhealthy change. We should be using PSD data, especially considering the FCC is using their data as well.
Well, and we haven't really dealt in this policy with the FCC data.
Well, no, I'm just saying that it's all based on the same. We're going to have a different set of standards that everybody else is using.
So should this policy, Patty, be sent back to the drawing board so that it anticipates the use of FCC data? Because FCC data is going to happen.
I'm not saying that.
Or are we going to amend it later?
The board agreed to PSD data. I just want to make it very clear what my statement is. The board agreed to PSD data. PSD data gets updated annually. We've got a requirement to build sustainable business plans. We should not be doing this without taking into consideration the new builds, because by definition, you don't have a sustainable business plan if you do not do that.
Well,
so if I can jump in real quickly, what I'm hearing is that there's a desire to specify our starting point, our launch point was the 2020 data set. That's all that was said. Grantees, as we get new information, will have to, when they're applying for a new grant or modification, reflect the updated data once they apply for a new grant. But I'm just hearing recognition that we're starting in 2020 for that data set. If a grantee comes in with another grant request, a modified grant request, then they'd have to update it for the latest data. That's all I've heard.
Oh, well, that's fine. We're saying the same thing then.
I don't
We're going to use the latest data.
Yeah,
fine. That's
exactly.
that's in other words, we won't bring a grant forward unless they include the latest data to the board.
That's right. I wouldn't.
Well, that's fine. That's fine.
I wouldn't ask anyone to go retroactively back to another world, right?
No, we're not doing that. We're talking about.
But I think we need to preserve our starting point for our grant initiated funding.
Yeah, we never.
What I heard. Exactly.
Sorry if we applied retroactive. We never intended to be retroactive.
Right, and I'm not hearing that, Christine, that's the request.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, great. So it still takes me back to this provision that the CDs have asked for, that the VCBB must make reasonable effort to recognize. I don't know what a reasonable effort would be to recognize the cost of reevaluating data. I mean, I'm sorry, there's a cost to applying for the grant. And I'm wondering whether the real request here is whether or not that each successful grant would have funding to cover the cost of data reevaluation. The problem, and Christine, you might be able to speak to this, the problem with that is it's kind of a business operating expense, because they have to know how their business plan is being impacted by the data anyway to stay current. So how do we address this? And when you see my red lines, this provision will be taken out.
Well, this was put in at the request of the CUDs, and it was that they were very insistent this be put in there. But I agree with you 100%, Holly. That it is the responsibility. This is something Adam and I are working closely on to really understand, work with the CUDs to understand what is the definition of a sustainable business plan. In normal business, you reevaluate your business plan every year based on changes in the market, changes in take rates and all those kind of things. So this, again, you could strike this, but the CUDs were pretty adamant they wanted it in there.
Well, I'm maybe we'll hear from the CUDs about why it's so essential, but I just want to come back to the fact that this is a very improved policy, and we want to keep it clean and clear with policy statements.
Yeah, so that's the tension. The board gave us instructions to go back, work with the CUDs and come up with a policy the CUDs agreed with. We did that. We may make changes that they disagree with, but the board needs to be prepared that we may not get agreement with the CUDs in the changes that we make.
One way to make it soften this is to say the VCBB may make a reasonable effort to recognize, instead of must, a may.
Well, I still don't know what a reasonable effort would be. And I really am wondering, Patty, whether it could solve everyone's problem. And this may be further than staff wants to go. Christine, help me here. That perhaps the VCBB may consider the cost of reevaluating data in its award of construction grants. Like, this could be an included cost that's applied for to recapture those costs which, I'm treading on maybe thin water here, because in my mind, that's an operating cost, not a capital cost for construction.
Mhm.
But it is also required by our construction grant process now. So should we make it a policy to reimburse the reevaluation of this data, because this is a new segment or section of their network that we're talking about funding? And so that specific information is going to be relevant to that grant.
Yeah, I worry that I think this should be part of a good sustainable business practice anyhow, and should be built into their operating models long term to be real value in their business case on an annual basis. Certainly, while we're issuing grants, that of course we can consider that, but at the same time, there's this whole business operating model that you need to be, we're trying to build sustainable business plans here. So this should be good management practice.
Well, I'm agreeing with you, but I'm really wondering whether that maybe the CUDs can talk to us about whether that's their objective, is to have us recognize their cost in the funding model. And that could be part of a policy.
Let's invite that discussion for the January meeting on that particular item.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's bring that up for January. So we'll have a red line version. Let's have the CDs get their thoughts together and what they intended by this, what their thoughts are on this. And let's invite that discussion for January in the CDs. Okay, so Holly, you're going to work with Stan. Get a red line version. We're going to roll in Laura's ads for that she put in the beginning. We'll add that in and then put this back on the agenda for January. Okay, any objections or further comments, I should say?
If we get this done by the next December, we still have another December board meeting. If we get it done by then, can we put it on the agenda then?
What's the next meeting? I thought we moved to once a month.
Rob, when's our next meeting?
I believe the second Monday in December. This is
Okay.
still the November meeting.
Gotcha.
Barely.
November, exactly. We haven't moved to once a month yet. All right, let's add it to the December 12th meeting. I don't think that is.
Yeah, I think we can get it done by then.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we're going to table that policy for now. That's my board packet. Anything else, Christine, on this item you want to talk about?
No, I think we can move on.
Okay. All right, let's go to number 4, which is the board communication policy.
Yeah, so Heron and I worked on this to kind of talk about, as the concern came up, or the request came up that we develop a written policy for how we're going to communicate with the board. So we worked on this, Heron and I, and then had it reviewed with staff. And what you see here is, and I'll go through this real quickly. I don't think there's a lot of controversy in it, but well, hang on, I'm scrolling down to it personally. One of the things I'll say is, we spend, as you may have seen from our weekly updates, that is we intend that to be, our regular update to the board. And we do a lot of work on that. So you will see, I would challenge that we keep you informed of everything in those weekly updates. So that's, that I want you all to recognize that that's the vehicle to focus on for regular updates, especially when we're going to monthly meetings. We want to keep you updated weekly. So, of course, the grants, you as a board approve of those grants. So they'll also be included in the weekly update. And of course, I don't believe grants are necessarily an issue because you vote on those grants and approve them, but we put that in there. Press releases, we're going to, notify you, as soon as the press release is ready to go, and we'll send it out. When they're, so you'll be informed just ahead of everybody on that one. And
So the intent, Christine, is to then on press releases, in advance of the press release, we would get a posting.
well, we can do it in advance of the press release, but
That's not what this says. If you were
well,
intending to do it
the
in
point
advance.
is we get these press releases done. It's really what's the intent of the board on this? Is if you want to approve press releases, that changes everything. But if we,
I don't think anybody wants to approve press releases. I certainly don't. I think that's a staff function. But I think that what I heard, at least from a couple board members, was just getting a heads up before it goes out was kind of the gist of what I heard. I don't know
well,
if that's
how
a straightforward thing.
tell me how long ahead of time you want it.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to sometimes press releases need to be like the day of. I'm very sympathetic to that. But if it's not time sensitive, the day before,
Yeah, I think we can agree to that.
obviously if it's urgent, it needs to get out that day, then you send it out that day and we get notice the same day.
All right, so we'll modify that language to say that, we'll provide it. The goal is to provide it the day ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And then of course we talk about general staff updates. Basically general staff updates are going to be anything that happened between the previous weekly update and the board meeting. Because again, but that's also an opportunity for board members to go into detail with any of the questions on the staff updates. So with that change, this is our policy. Change is press releases will provide, the goal is to provide it the day ahead of time.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in, Christine. I just want to, I thank you for this policy. I enjoy the weekly updates because you really quickly get up to speed on what you guys are working on. You have an incredibly busy schedule. We can see that in those weekly updates. With that change on the press release, I am fine with this and happy with this policy. Is there any other discussion or comments? All right, I'm going to make a motion to approve this policy with the change we talked about on the press release. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Excellent, 2 seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carried. Cool. All right, next on our agenda is Northern Borders Capacity Grant, number 5. You want to tee this up?
Yes, first of all, the Northern Borders Regional Commission has been very supportive of our work in getting broadband, right from the beginning with the CUDs, and they continue to work very closely with staff. So we've got, we've got some recommendations in terms of that we look for the board to take a look at the general concept of where we're headed in terms of providing shared services with the CUDs. And I'll have Rob take this away. Go ahead, Rob.
Great. Thank you, Christine. I'm unmuted now, right? Okay. So I'm sharing my screen right now to show you the document that we developed in collaboration with Vacuda and individual CUDs. This is based on the initial proposal was where we had 1.25 million for a single infrastructure project that for a public-private partnership. We've come to consensus that that concept is outdated considering all the other infrastructure funding. What we've discovered is that there is a need and an opportunity for additional shared resources among the CUDs and between the CUDs and the VCBB. So the proposal included in the packet, it's short on details in some ways. There's a lot of who does what and how, but we wanted to bring it to the board's attention as requested before we go talk to Northern Borders again. They invited us to apply not just for 1.25 million, but for 2.5 million. So adding another year onto our proposal. So this is what we've developed. The goal is there's two goals. We want to find efficiencies. We want to increase accountability by in several ways. First and foremost, we want more insight into what is going on in business plans. We want more resources available for the CUDs when it comes to the single audit and the BEAD program and going through. So we have consensus, we have Vacuda's support on this proposal. I'm just going to go through some of the different ideas that we wanted to submit to Northern Borders. First off, we wanted a highly qualified financial expert. All of the CUDs, they have their own treasurer, they have their own accountant, but having somebody, most likely contracted, that specific focus is on broadband is going to be key, both for evaluating business plans as they change, updating business plans, and looking at various expenses. It's a way to identify problems early, both for the CUDs and then through some, we're working this out, as I said, to let us know what is going on sooner. This is also going to help with the creative finance team. This is Adam's work along with several of the CUD leaders and our contract with Ice Miller. So we've been hearing a lot about a gap in funding between the ARPA funds and when the BEAD funds become available. Well, we don't have a number on what that gap is going to be. We don't know the burn rates. That is what this, it's not a position contract, what it's going to be is for. We want more capacity in the program coordinator role for Vacuda. I think right now, Rob, care to jump in, but I think it's one day a week. The more capacity they have, the more insight we have, the more accountability and oversight is possible and can exist in terms of both in terms of finding efficiencies and addressing issues. So the communications and marketing support. We've just in this past month, we found out how valuable that is for us as the VCBB. We want to extend that as a service to assist the CUDs in marketing their efforts, getting press releases out, announcing their progress, celebrating the victories, calling for volunteers, you name it, but making sure that it's all across the media when a new town is completed. Administrative support for Vacuda. Then it's pretty self-explanatory. The next big thing is regarding support for the Make Ready process, the FCC challenge process. And we've spoken about this, but we haven't included it in the budget, to having somebody that goes out there and inspects projects when they're completed, whether it's a CUD project or whether it's another eligible provider, to make sure that what is built is what it was agreed to, that they followed all the standards. So this may be one contract, this may be several different contracts that will support us in on-the-ground knowledge of the infrastructure, somebody that can go on a ride out with each of the CUDs and the utility to point out things, just to raise the bar, raise the knowledge level among the CUDs and make sure that the Make Ready is being charged appropriately, pushback is happening where is appropriate, and the CUDs understand that there are costs involved in all of this. we also wanted additional GIS support to continue existing contracts. So that's more the immediate. The other three things are, it says year 2 and 3, it might be a little sooner than that. So somebody that's more of an expert on the BEAD process, like we're developing this expertise internally, but we may need more than that. Within the BEAD program, that's the next big funding source for us. Things seem to change very quickly. It's a very elastic process, both in terms of the FCC challenge and some of the rules going forward. So we may need some contracting assistance to see us through this. We also thought that there's an opportunity for some shared systems related to technology, related to IT. Then there's, if we get the middle mile grant, we'll know early next year where we're at with that. This could provide some additional technical support there. So these are more examples. This is more the framework that we want to bring to Northern Borders. We understand there's details, said the who, what, when, and where, but we were asked to brief the board on any upcoming grant requests. And while this is an amendment, it's a pretty major amendment. So that's what I have right now. I know if Rob is on here, he can also answer some questions. He was involved in this as well, and I can go from there. At your pleasure, Patty.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Holly has her hand up, and we'll have Holly go first.
Thanks, Patty. Rob, I just have 2 questions. We already have a staff position for BEAD administration, so I'm a little curious why we would need additional funding for additional resources on that. That would be my first question. Did you have a way of defining the difference between your staff position and these additional resources?
Sure. I think what we're envisioning is kind of the relationship we have now with Guidehouse for the ARPA funds, where they are doing this at a national level. They have expertise, multiple people focusing on different aspects of things that far surpasses anything that we can possibly acquire as an individual staff person. We also have other legal issues that we're focusing on. So it's more of just an additional place to ask questions. We have to evaluate whether that's going to be something that lives even with CTC, or whether it's another relationship with Guidehouse, or whether it's something entirely on its own. As I said, these are more topics, but it was a need identified that a lot of times we have questions. And frankly, when it comes to BEAD, a lot of times we have questions and there's not clear answers, or the answer today could be different a week from today. It's one thing that's good about the program is they're very responsive to the concerns of state broadband leaders, but that can be a double-edged sword too, of knowing what the rules are.
Well, I'd just like to point out that the fact that the rules change is reason to have a staff member, and keeping track of it is reason to have a staff member. And the fact that they're responsive to state staff members, all good. So spending additional funding really should be relegated to specific needs for service providers that can't be staff functions. And for example, I wouldn't expect that Stan would become a legal expert in BEAD specifically. So I get that. I sort of thought that we had not paid out of our funding for Guidehouse rather.
We have not. We have not paid. Guidehouse has been all for the ARPA for any ARPA project. We just happened to be the largest ARPA project, but they were still discussing what their involvement would be with BEAD, of whether the state contract is going to be expanded or not, of whether some of that's going to potentially have to be paid by us, since we're like BEAD is very much about us. Like there's said one of the many questions, but it's something we wanted to get in there as a placeholder of a need that we're looking at for a potential shared service and a potential additional knowledge that we need to be sure that we are following all the rules correctly. The last thing any of us wants is to deploy all these grant fundings, have all these projects, and then have the Treasury come back or NTIA come back and do an audit, and we realize we interpreted things wrong. So this is much of this proposal is about being careful.
So I know that it's a staff function to manage well. So I know you'll do that. I just want to identify that you need to be careful in areas where it could overlap with expenditures already made. But in the nature of placeholding, I'm now going to take off my VCBB board member hat for a moment and talk with you a bit about affordability. It's not even on your list. And you know that I'm very aware of the CUD's interest and needs in finding ways to build affordability into their programs, and it's not funded under the construction grants, and the BEAD funding is not even available until 2024. So I'm wondering whether you could put affordability support on your list of potential uses for this increased additional amount of funding, even more than you had planned for. Thanks.
So that there's potential there. There's also, we have under the
Was that a
grant
yes?
section.
Was that a yes?
It's I want to discuss it with the team, but it makes sense to me in terms of the BEAD policy things. But I was going to say that we do have somebody that's in the grant side of thing of, we want to make sure we have grant writers to be able to seize every opportunity, and that includes some of the new FCC grants for outreach for the affordable the ACP. As well as other opportunities to be able to access funds. We also do have funds from the BEAD Digital Equity Planning Grant as well, once that's officially approved.
You know that we can trumpet the availability of ACP subsidy funds from the rooftops for all we're worth. And the system is so difficult for individual households to navigate that the role of a group like EAB, which is not done by anybody else, is an additional need, and frankly has been very vocally supported by Vicuda and the CUDs. So I am specifically hopeful that you would consider putting affordability support for the CUDs on this list, since we're in a gap window right now.
Yeah, no, I'll certainly consider and bring it back to Vicuda before we submit. So
Thank you.
we're doing our best to find consensus, and that certainly is an area where I think we can. Yeah.
All right, Christine, you had a hand up?
Yes, I wanted to put an exclamation point after what Holly said about affordability, and just make the point that, our focus right now, just to be clear with the board and everybody listening, is our goal is to get as much grant funding as possible, because right now, based on and these are based on state averages, so it's going to change by CUD, but right now, with our goal of getting 60% equity funding, we're at an average rate that we need per paying customer of $90. That doesn't mean it's going to be $90 as a starting fee, but it just means that our average, in order to make a sustainable business plan, our average a monthly rate needs to be $90. But every $50 million we get reduces that by $10. So if we get 100% funded with grants, then that $90 goes down to $50. So now you get that gap between the ACP, and there's other programs that can get you up to about $38 a month. Now you get it down to $12 a month. So I just want to reinforce our primary goal right now is to access as much grant funding possible. That really is our job as staff at the VCBB. But affordability is really important, and we will definitely talk about that. And thank you for that, Holly.
Yeah, Christine, I really appreciate that quick synopsis of a model. It's not reflected in the rates we're seeing from the CUDs, and I would really appreciate your consideration of affordability funding as part of the Northern Borders grant menu. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I hear you. I hear that. I hear your point, and it's well made. Thank you.
So I had some questions on this grant, high level questions relative. So I understand this is VCBB and Vicuda are applying together.
No, VCBB would be applying directly. We would be doing a contractual relationship for any resource that that lives at VCBB. Of where that lives will be decided upon of what's going to be the most efficient for getting it in place and having the necessary oversight. But we will be the grant recipient again. So
Okay.
they will be a subrecipient.
So if we are hiring resources for Vicuda to use for the CUDs, how are we managing that relationship? Or I know you probably don't have all the specifics.
It would likely be a subgrant for specific items. So like we're not gonna if we're not gonna hire their administrative assistant, for example. They're gonna hire that. We're gonna be giving them a sub grant so they can hire it and have the same kind of grantor-grantee relationship
So
to
how do we
report back
manage
things.
that relationship and make sure accountability and efficiencies are happening appropriately? Like anything that the auditors or anybody who's looking over our shoulders, how do we manage that to make sure accountability is happening?
So this goes into like, for example, the financial expert one. We want to have a built-in reporting mechanism that if something is found, we're notified early so that we are part of that contract. When it comes to the administrative support person that they hire, the program director thing, it's going to be in the reporting. The same type of things. That's the same way that we have to manage other grants, that they're going to need to provide a monthly report for what the expenses are, what was accomplished, what are the challenges, what are the risk factors, those types of items. I can't see a way where it could be where they would be. It would be a strange situation if we were contracting directly with somebody to provide administrative support for
Mhm.
them. So it's a balancing act, and I think that's more what I was saying. Of we have to understand there's a lot of work we still have to do on the how.
Yeah, let me interrupt this. I didn't take my hand down, so I consider it raised again. But the your question about monitoring is important in terms of the key performance indicators. You know, so we build these business plans based on assumptions around take rates, assumptions around revenue per customer, assumptions around number of passings. And of course, that's going to be part of regular reporting. So if, and of course, construction timelines. So if construction timelines start to slow down, that's an early indicator we've got a financial problem, right? And we've got to dig into that. So I think we need to, and I've been giving this a lot of thought. We've got to give it a lot more thought together. But the idea around what are the key performance indicators that we need to monitor that need to be reported right up to the board in terms to ensure that we see when a business plan is off track or on track.
So, okay, I get that. So you're going to be spooling up a lot of funds. 2.5 million is no small pot of money. We're going to be spooling up a lot of taxpayer funds, and we have to assure accountability of those funds. And we're subbing this function out over to Vicuda, some of these functions out over to Vicuda. And it's not specified in here, and I don't expect that it would, but I want to know eventually how we're going to assure we have cost-effective use of these dollars. If they're all spent, I'm not prejudging how the funds will be spent, but I'm flagging this as how are we going to make sure we're not wasting dollars? Accountability and efficiency rolled into all this.
Yeah, no, agreed. The idea of this proposal is all about accountability and efficiency. The last place we want to lose that is in how they're deployed.
So I'm raising that now. I don't have a suggestion of in this document where to put it, but certainly, getting 2.5 million is great. Managing that 2.5 million is going to be even more important and paramount for our reputation to make sure we're doing it effectively. I'm just trying to sort through how this is going to be done. It's gray right now and murky. I'm not expecting an answer, but I want to raise that flag now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, with this, we were more looking for just the sense of the board and an ability to start moving forward on this.
So what's the proposal? Can you just repeat the proposal? It's a grant to allow Vikuda to hire an admin assistant?
No, that's when I shared the screen before. Um, it's a grant to boost Vikuda's capacity, for the individual CUD's capacity through Vikuda, and to provide additional accountability.
So Brian, in the proposal, is it administrator, is a CFO, is a grant specialist? There's several positions that they would hire.
So it's in the board packet on page 18.
Communication
I'm putting it
and
on the screen now. So
Yeah, I scanned it. It didn't make sense to me. So are we going to get savings out of not hiring functions at the CUDs because they're centralized and resident at Vikuda?
in some ways, yes. The idea is
Is
that
it auditable? Is it auditable savings, or is it qualitative kind of slush?
I'm not sure how best to answer that, but for an example, like every CUD doesn't need a broadband specific, highly qualified financial expert. It's better to have as a central resource to realize the efficiencies gained through that.
Yeah, which says
Um,
it's an auditable. Your point, Brian, is we should be able to show those savings. You know, again, this is where the shared services come in. Not every CUD needs a CFO. So let's see how we can coordinate those services to save money.
But we'll
so are
see.
they all going to relent to say, I'm not going to have a CFO?
Exactly.
I don't know the answer to that. That's what we have to work through. You know, we have to work through. Does every CUD need to have the same organization structure? I would say that's an obvious no, right? But you know, what do these CUD organization structures look like? Where can there be shared services which can create greater efficiencies?
Yeah, here's another example. Like some of the CUDs are that they have their own treasurer, but some of these other roles are outsourced to their provider. Well, they should also have additional insight into the burn rate, into the finances. So it's not just us, it's them having that insight as well to be able to make better business decisions. But this is one thing we do have to work at. Like the CUDs consensed on this list, but the how is something that we need to work through.
Yeah, and understand we're not asking for approval here. We've achieved the goal. The goal was to have this discussion with the board. We will come back with what this will look like in detail with the grant. But this is really a starting point for the discussion.
We wanted to get your sense of whether it's okay for us to move forward since there's a process for everything, with the understanding that we have a lot of logistics to work out of how this is, just like with any shared service, of how it's actually going to work in practice.
So you're not asking for approval today from the board on this?
I would like to know the sense of the board
Right.
on this.
Yeah.
So before we put a lot of extra time into seeing this through. Like we come in accepting that there's a lot of logistical questions of how, but in terms of the concept of shared resources to boost accountability and efficiencies, that's the concept we're moving forward with these examples, and we will go back and see where some of the affordability questions, if this is the best place for it.
And you know, my feedback remains as stated earlier. I'm concerned about wasting money, and I'm not sure here. It's not clear to me how we're not wasting money. I would be excited to have another 2.5 million, but it's got to be run and managed effectively so we can stand up and say this was good for the overall functionality of this effort. I'm just not seeing that in here. There's not a check and balance.
As I said, those are things we have to work out through the reporting mechanisms as we work it out with any grant program.
All right, let's take it. Brian, Dan, then Holly.
I think Holly had her hand up first.
You're doing all right. Holly, Brian, then
I
Dan.
think I had my hand up first.
That's
Oh.
right.
I didn't see that, Laura.
Laura wins.
All right, Laura, you're first, then Holly.
Thanks. I love the idea of adding capacity to VQDA. I am concerned about adding I'm concerned when we think about adding shared services, that's the role of the VCBB. And so, so at VCUDA, how are they that seems like a place where we want them to be able to have facilitation amongst the CUDs, to help communicate to the VCBB, to advocate on their behalf to the VCBB, but shared services, I would want to understand why that is better served at the VCUDA level as opposed to the VCBB, because the VCBB's largely their purpose is actually to provide those shared services. So, having a full-time director makes a lot of sense. Potentially a policy analyst makes a lot of sense, as they are the ones closest to the ground. So making policy recommendations to VCBB makes a lot of sense. So I like the idea, but I am not ready to sign off on this. And I need to understand more about the finance piece. Trying to find that.
Would it be helpful if Rob stepped in to talk about it from the VCUDA perspective, since this was based on the joint work? Just to throw that out there.
So I'll put my,
Let's go around to all the board members.
So, yeah.
And at the end, have Rob come in and give his 2 cents.
Yeah, I'm receiving this as like, this is where we want to go and we have time to talk about it. So I would love to hear, information from VCUDA. Hopefully this is not and we're ready to hit send. And the only reason I say that is because there's some really kind of structural, foundational relationship issues here between the VCBB and VCUDA that really we need to think about. And so, okay, I think I've said what I have to say. Thank you.
All right, Holly, you're up.
I really respect this opportunity to build expertise in shared services that would serve the CUDs. I leave it to others to figure out how exactly this gets structured, but if we had a financial professional who was steeped in knowledge and lore of how broadband works and what the various grants are, the prospects for creating a format for both budgeting and auditing would be pretty streamlined. And we might house that professional at VCBB and charge the CUDs a below market rate for that work. I mean, a significantly below market rate for that work. So the cost effectiveness could be clarified in that way. But I think really what I'm hearing staff say is the cost effectiveness is in building knowledge base. It's not necessarily straight up cost savings to VCBB, although it is in some of these examples. And part of the problem in this presentation is that we're mixing and matching resources between things that serve VCBB and things that actually serve CUDs. And I think a little advice here, I think if we separated those things out, it might help us understand how such a thing might be administered. So I'm generally in favor of this.
Okay, Brian?
I echo Patty's comments, which I don't necessarily agree that we want to go after every grant we can, because if we're just going after grants and then not wisely spending the money, that's just bad form. So if this can get rationalized in some way, I could be supportive of it, but there would have to be broad acceptance within the CUDs that they are going to effectively outsource certain functions to these central resources, whether they sit at VCUDA or VCBB. And I think there should be some, it shouldn't be free. It should be some skin in the game. I mean, the CUDs have built, in theory, some of these costs into their business plans, right? And now we're layering in additional resources and costs above and beyond that. I don't feel like this has been reconciled well. I get the high level concept. I think it's worth pursuing theoretically, but not taking any action on. And until you have well scoped positions and firm agreement on use of those skills, those resources, and perhaps a cost share of them, I wouldn't be recruiting for these yet.
Okay, thank you. Dan?
I think what I was about to say has mostly been said, so I just reiterate that wherever the offsets are, if we could show how the money that might be received here would someplace else offset an administrative cost and then or therefore advance a build out or a connection, that would be helpful to see. But you all have already said what I was about to kind of follow through with. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Dan. Holly, you have a set follow-up?
Just a minor one. I want staff to understand what we're talking about here is entering the realm of operating expense as opposed to our capital costs. So let's be careful when we cross that line. Are we even within our authority? Are we actually starting down a different path? That said, and that was focused on CUD operating cost, not VCBB operating cost. Some of what I heard on this list was to facilitate Act 71 objectives and grant compliance. And those are very important, but in justifying those kinds of positions, when you come back to the board, you'd want to show us why that isn't already covered within your staff structure. And I think you have some ideas about that, but you need to make it clear. Finally, I'd really like to know what your target date is or what the Northern Borders Regional Commission expects in terms of your returning to them. Is there a deadline, in fact?
Okay, so just a few things. First, we had told Northern Borders we would try to come back in mid-December. Like there's a process before we can even get into a lot of these details of having the concept approved. They just need a two-page they need something shorter than what we've presented here to the board. One of the reasons that we want to do that is to have support for the FCC challenge process and the make ready support as soon as possible. The other thing to note with this proposal is like this is about building the capacity. Like shared resources is something that we are supposed to provide for the CUDs. So it's about building the capacity of them at large over beyond even the existence of the VCBB. So it's like we've already invested some into the organizational development of the CUDs. This is putting a higher level to ensure the accountability and also to build in the capacity for dealing specifically with a lot of the challenges that come with the BEAD program, as well as other feedback that we've received in terms of finding efficiencies between CUDs. Like we don't want to have a heavy hand and tell CUDs, oh, you need to merge because it's going to be cheaper because your operating expenses are going to be less. But what we can do is encourage different resources to be shared among them, and that's the point here.
Okay, Holly?
Rob, I just have to say that with every sentence, it gets worse. So this is like a Swedish smorgasbord. And I'm just getting, I mean, my plate is full. So I'm just having a hard time, further hard time. And the fact that you reference the challenge, you know, the FCC challenge, I'm not sure what that was about, that little reference, but I think you need to narrow down if you're going to go back in mid-December. And I I guess we're going to be talking about this on our next agenda.
Okay, so let's table this unless there's anything else, Christine, that you want to add. At this point, I think we're done having a reaction discussion to it.
Yeah, you said basically what I was going to say.
Okay.
We'll go back. You know, I'll kind of give the final word on this. You know, obviously we got a lot of work to do. Mid-December, we may not be coming back to you in mid-December with it. We've got work to do, and we're taking that as an action item.
Okay. All right, let's move on to item 6 on our agenda, which is staff updates.
Yeah, I'll kick this off by introducing Tracy Collier. Tracy, maybe you can give a little bit of your background, but let's say, Tracy, our primary focus is to working with Tracy, and I was very pleased, met with her this morning, going over all the budget issues. I must say she's very talented in terms of budgets. So we will be, I'm confident we'll be coming into January with you with a report and proposal and work through that. But I'm very impressed so far. Tracy, thank you for joining us. Why don't you give the board a little background and answer any questions they have.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. My name is Tracy Collier. I've been with the state of Vermont for about 8 years now. Started with the state of Vermont with a federal position, federal grant through the Economic Services Division to program manage the Jobs for Independence SNAP Employment and Training Project. It was $8.9 million over 3 years. And that was very successful and led to a new employment and training system in the department. I then moved over to Public Service Department to help administer the utility assistance programs to the ARPA funds. And I was very happy to do that, and those funds are wrapping up. So I'm glad to be joining the VCBB to see how I can support this initiative, both with the budget and with other administrative needs that are requested of me, as well as being a direct contact for you, the board. So I'm happy to learn more about this as I go along and do my best to help everyone else.
Excellent. Welcome aboard, Tracy. We're glad to have you on.
Thank you, Patty.
And Tracy, by the way, is a resource for you as board members to get information, files, anything you're confused. Feel free to reach out to Tracy directly. She can snag any one of us down if she needs further help. But we want to put her right in that stream as a resource for the board.
Great. Thank you. Excellent.
Yeah. So at this point, we kind of have got, like you say, last Thursday we gave a pretty extensive updates, but we don't have anything additional report. Our Wednesday we did because of the holidays, but I'll turn it over to Alyssa for a dashboard review.
Yep. Let me share my screen. So I included a snapshot on page 21 of the packet. And so the update currently is that I've worked with Stone to add in the PSD data, so you can zoom in and see the differences from 2021. So you can see there's cable service here in this area of Milton, for instance, and you can also click from tab to tab to see, to go back and look at the 2021 data, and you can look at that statewide, or you can look at it on a individual CUD basis for either 2021 or 2022 data. And I also just had included this, just the comparison of the chart of the total numbers that show the unserved, underserved, and served 120 and 100 numbers, just for a quick comparison. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Alyssa. I find those dashboard the presentation and the information in the board packet helpful always. So thank you very much for putting that in. It's very clear. It's easy to digest that information in terms of the visuals. And just want to do a big thank you for all that work on that. Laura has her hand up, so I'll turn it to Laura.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think the dashboard is a really great tool. And I appreciate you providing that updated for us. I will say that I'm really concerned about that 120 measurement. And I don't know if this is for Alyssa, Christine, or Patty, or someone else, but I would like to have some more information about who those providers are that are claiming 120. And so if it's self-attestation that is happening there, if it's just the cable companies, I wasn't, or if there are also DSL. There's not DSL. Is it just cable?
Cable for 100 over 20. Yes, but I'm just going to put an exclamation point on what you just said. That we have an upcoming agenda item talking about the FCC Broadband Mapping Data Challenge. And we are equally concerned, Laura, about the presentation of 100 over 20. And you know, we're putting a plan together to get to that, because this is really the whole mapping issue and the challenge for us, even in terms of our BEAD funding that's coming up. So thank you for bringing that up. Like I say, I'm just putting an exclamation point on what you just said.
Okay, thank you, Christine. And so when that comes in, I would like to make sure that we are clear, and I don't know if we get that from the DPS, if there are any providers besides cable that are reporting coverage at those speeds. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Holly, you have your hand up?
Yep, I do. Alyssa, thanks again for the dashboard. The question I have is, and I'm feeling a bit chagrined that I don't know the answer to this, are you providing a link to us where we can go play with the dashboard anytime we wish?
Yep. So it's public, so I can get Christine to share it in with one of the next weekly update.
Okay,
So
somehow I missed the link along the way. So
no, you didn't have it yet. We're there now. So
okay.
You have my commitment I will provide that to you.
That's just great. I'm going to do it every day.
And technically there is a login. If anyone has GIS experience and wants to go further than the dashboard, just be in touch with me. But I was assuming that is not wanted, but just to let you know, it is available if any of the board members want to actually go in and look at the data that isn't public.
I think as this dashboard goes public, the kinds of qualifications that Laura and Christine have identified as to source, it might need to make it into the dashboard itself so that we don't have people taking snapshots of potentially misrepresented information.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, what's up next?
Okay, next we have the FCC mapping. Oh no, VCUDA update is next. Sorry.
Wait, were there other staff updates?
Yeah, we get staff.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks. I skipped. Yeah, press coverage. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alyssa. We're still not done with staff. Go ahead, Aaron. Talk about our press coverage.
We did have, let's see, in the first week after our last meeting, there were a couple articles about the $26.5 million grant approved in October. That was in the Manchester Journal and Brattleboro Reformer. I do have links to all of these stories in the packet if there's anything you wanted to look at more closely. WCAX had a story at the Capitol for a day event about towns having trouble spending their ARPA money. The News and Citizen ran a story about what providers will be serving in the Lamoille FiberNet CUD. We did have a couple stories on the vote to form a Chittenden County CUD from the from BT Digger and the other paper. And then last week, BT Digger ran a commentary piece by Catherine Ash. There was a nice mention of the work we've been doing at the VCBB, as well as with about our workforce development plan. And a 7 days article profiling some of the people who were recently connected to broadband and how that's affecting their lives. BT Digger did an article about the problems with the new FCC map data, and the Pots and Pans blog had a similar story today. That's something that we'll be talking more about later in the agenda. Also today, the Brattleboro Reformer ran an article about our expanded town match program, was something we discussed a couple weeks ago.
Thank you, Heron.
Any questions of Heron? Laura has her hand up. To Laura, then Holly.
I don't, actually. Good.
And Holly?
I just have this question. You know, these news articles are mentioned in our weekly, so you know we're getting good stereo on that visibility progress. I'm wondering whether there's any way to be collecting and posting these news articles or releases on our webpage at the Department of Public Service.
Our releases are all posted. And so all the information is there. They actually go onto our website first.
I actually don't see them. I'm on the page. I see network design listening, public records requests, broadband funding, maximize broadband service and public Wi-Fi hotspots. There's no in the news. Oh, here's press releases and announcements.
All the press releases live there, and that's where they are first. And then they go out and everything refers back. We don't have a section where all the different articles are, and that's something we could think about.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
I don't see that as a very difficult request to fulfill, so we'll follow up on that. Because we do monitor, you know, all the media. We have our Google alerts, so I think it's beware when you hear the executive director say it's simple, but
it's not a problem for me to put those up if that's something we want to do. We can make another section, and then we've been getting a lot of coverage, so we centralize it all.
Okay, great. Take a look at it. If it's easy to do, go for it. Go for it.
Actually, Patty, I do have a question.
Okay, floor is yours, Laura.
And I apologize if this was missed while I was gone, but I noted in the weekly report, and I wonder if this is something that Heron's working on or working on with Christine, a legislative day, and that VCUTA is also working on a legislative day, and hopefully that would be one and the same.
well, it's a little bit of a challenge because the legislative day that VCUTA was given was May. So I reached out to Catherine Sims in the Rural Caucus to request, you know, to request time ahead of the legislature. So we're trying to do everything we can to communicate with new legislative reps. We think actually the Rural Caucus may be one of the most effective way. I have reached out to I forget his name, the new not the House side, head of the House side, and I'll be reaching out to Jill Kruwinski this week. But I'm trying to figure out ways to get to these new legislative representatives, certainly well before May.
I think I had talked with VCUTA. I think they were trying to do some other things. So, and I think they're trying to schedule coming in sooner. And I would agree, the Rural Caucus would be a great place for VCBB and VCUTA together. We would not want to see you guys.
Yes.
I think it's probably wise for you to be appearing together and not separately in the legislature. So Just
We
wanted
agree.
to put that out
Yep.
there. So I hope that that ends up being one event, or if it's multiple events, that they are joint.
Yep, thank you. We will heed your advice.
Okay, so let's move on to upcoming construction grant applications. We have Lucy's name.
Yeah, go ahead, Lucy.
Okay, so we do not have any new construction grant applications since the last board meeting, but I wanted to give you a few updates. Lamoille continues to be working on preparing to apply to a construction grant, so that should be coming in the coming months and weeks or months. And Northwest Fiberworks issued their RFI this week for a network operator to serve as a tenant on their planned fiber to the premise network. And then finally, the Southern Vermont CUD had the construction grant that was agreed to this past summer. And it's a conventional grant agreement, meaning that the money is paid at the completion of the project. But in the grant agreement, they also included funds for the CUD to hire a program director for the CUD's capacity throughout the duration of the construction. So our intent is to provide that money to the CUD, not to their partner, but to the CUD for hiring their program director initially so that that hire can take place as was the intent in the grant, and to have the remainder of the grant continue to be paid at the end in line with their conventional grant agreement structure. So I think those are my updates, somewhat brief, but hopefully we will have more at the next meeting.
Thank you, Lucy. Kristen is not here. She got tied up with another meeting, so we can move on to VCUDA updates at your pleasure.
Okay. Yeah, before we go there, I had some questions on the weekly update that I wanted to go to. There is a question or a statement in the weekly update on the very beginning sections, communication union districts. It says staff is concerned that using materials purchased via one federal grant program, ARPA, for a fiber build out via a different program, BEAD, would run afoul to accounting rules. Staff posed the questions to Guidehouse during the Thursday meeting. There's no clear answers. Can you give us more information on this?
Yes, that's actually, in my meeting with Tracy, we talked about that. That's one of the challenges we need to face is, since we're funding these CUDs across different grants, those different grant requirements, are going to impact us. So, BEAD hasn't been fully defined yet. So we want to be careful. That's really, that's kind of a flag we're raising, saying we have to be careful. We're going to try to, as I talked with Tracy this morning, we're going to try to figure out how to fund everything, try to keep it as simple as possible by allocating certain activities and materials to a specific grant. But when they cross multiple grant programs, that becomes a challenge that we need to figure out. So that's what we're flagging there. We're working on that. We don't have answers yet.
Okay. Keep us updated on that, because that sounds like a big issue, quite frankly.
Yeah, we have a very complicated budget because we have multiple grant feeds, and that's why I'm so happy Tracy's here.
Christine, my other question was under the legislative, legal, and policy section relative to the auditor's office. This questions focused on 4 themes: how the BCBB ensures CUDs conform to best practices and presents accurate information to the board. 2 is how the VCBB's actions promote affordability to the end customer. 3, the VCBB's intent to appropriately hold ISPs accountable on behalf of taxpayers. And 4, the VCBB's promotion of efficiency, consistency, and transparency. For you discuss these questions, were they satisfactory? Can you give us a little more juice on that?
Yeah, so that's these questions that the audit, by the way, this is not an audit. This is just an investigation. We welcome it because we're early on in the process. But those are the areas that these questions are focusing on, which I think you as a board have been focusing on as well. And if you look at Kristen spent 3 hours with the auditor this morning. providing those detailed answers as well. So we're looking forward to actually getting the report, because this is not, this is not any type of action. This is advisory. So, you as a board, we've discussed how we do this. We will, we basically answered the questions as they, as honestly and as completely as possible. So I think this will be very helpful, and of course the board will get this report as well.
Can you give us the sense from the auditor's office, and I know you can't speak for the auditor, but do they have concerns of what we're doing right now, or these are just overlying general concepts they want to flesh out? Are there any specific concerns of what we're doing so far?
We have not got it. I think intentionally for the auditors, they haven't given us any signal at all at this point.
Okay.
But I will point out, we, as Jason Gibbs said in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, this is the largest infrastructure project the state's embarked upon. I don't know the accuracy of that, but it's a big project. So, I expect the auditor to be doing their due diligence on this. And I spoke to them, I spoke to Doug Hoffer in July of last year, spoke to him in the fall, because clearly that was the intent. So I think timing is perfect for us in terms of we have staff to carry out recommendations. So I'm really looking at this really completely from a positive view. I don't think the auditors are coming at this with any specific concerns.
Okay, that's helpful. Does anybody else have any questions regarding the staff updates or the weekly updates or anything they want to put in here now?
Yes.
Go ahead, Laura.
Same section. So just asking for, the language was interesting to me. So when I think about the VCBB and I think about the DPS, I think about the VCBB being a support organization for the development of telecommunications, and the DPS being the kind of regulator. And so I feel like this was just a shorthand statement, so maybe you can just explain a little bit more. There was a note that the VCBB would be holding ISPs accountable to the taxpayers. And so that's not something that I've thought about. So, I mean, we have largely funded CUDs working in partnership with ISPs. We have funded an ISP. And so I presume that you are having discussions with Commissioner Tierney on this or not? I mean, is this something that you can provide a little bit more information about what you mean about holding ISPs accountable to the taxpayers? A little more context.
Well, so this is, I think there's a couple things that go on with that statement. First of all, there's limited things that even June can do because it's regulated by FCC policy. Right. So, I'm not sure where the auditor's going with those questions, and we'll see what the recommendations are. But, we're, as far as holding them accountable, we've built into our grant agreements what we can. But at the end of the day, I think I'll call that, that's something we've got to work on, I think, longer term, is to define. And I think, a number of board members have brought this up. How do we impose accountability within our ability of enforcement? And this has been a problem, obviously, with state policy and federal policy all along, because that's why we're here today, because there hasn't been an enforcement mechanism with the telecommunication companies to ensure ongoing performance. That still does not exist. That we still do not have. We built into our agreements reporting. The agreements we put in place will get us ongoing performance reporting at the address level. And then the question is, what can we do with that?
So Is that a request from the auditor, Christine? That, like, the framing of that, was that from the auditor? Like, the auditor wants to know how VCBB will be holding ISPs accountable? I mean, that makes, okay, so, and that makes some sense to me. I mean, just in terms of context, thinking like the auditor was involved in a lot of the, I mean, there were some bad failures as part of the BTOP programs in 2009, I think it was, whatever, and misrepresentations of coverage, you know, from self-attestations, which we still count on today. So, you know, I guess the question of whose job it is. So, you know, that 120 question, whose job it is to make sure that that's 120, I would say to you, that's not your job. I would say that's June's job. So that would be an interest. I'd be interested I'd be interested in if there's any disagreement around that on a policy level, both here and in the legislature. I mean, that seems, I would be surprised to hear otherwise. And I'd be very curious about the rationale.
Thank you.
Yep.
I agree. I think Holly has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Holly, you're next.
Laura, I just want to suggest to you that historically the department has been very reluctant to do anything that smells of regulation. And in this, if this is a representation to the public that is a misrepresentation, it becomes a legal issue for the Attorney General, I suppose. But I'm not sure that we can rely on the department for this level of review. And I'm wondering whether this goes to the requests in the laundry list of things for compliance and costs to be shared. I mean, perhaps the VCBB, in order to ensure that it is testing for universal service plans, needs to be building in some funding to be doing at least some testing. It seems very related to the department's mapping function. So somewhere in the middle it is reality, but the department's mapping function, as you are so aware, is self-reported data a lot of the time. But I think Clay gave us some insight towards their process and how they test that. So hopefully we could get more depth in our understanding of how that works and figure out whether we need to spend some funding or someone needs to spend some funding, because this is not the level of review that department does today.
Yeah. Yeah, I would respond and say, I think this is a great area, Christine and Patty, for us to, you know, really work on establishing some clarity, some recommendations. Again, thinking about the intent when we created VCBB, you know, we knew that we had a regulatory entity. It's, you know, having that regulatory entity and the development entity being in the same place created some weird tensions. You know, and so moving that development entity outside of that regulatory entity, but just thinking about how these jurisdictions are going to, you know, going forward is, I think, a worthy endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this kind of going into our next agenda item, which we'll hit it again. But I will say that the PSD is working on a challenge process for their data. We've been working closely with the PSD and, you know, tying with that theme that the PSD owns the data and has the responsibility. They have accepted the challenge of developing a challenge process. So you'll hear more about that when we get to item number 8.
Okay, so let's close up staff updates. Unless there's any other burning questions. No more hands. Let's go to the VCUDA update.
Great.
Rob is with us.
I am. Thank you. So thank you, and hope everyone had a great Turkey Day. I think we did a very substantial update 2 weeks ago on kind of the construction progress and what's happening in each CUD. And unsurprisingly, the items I wanted to touch on today are related to some of the earlier agenda items. So my intention is not to reopen them, but I do want to provide a little bit of context and framing on a couple of them. And we'll look forward to working with the team over the next couple of weeks to be in a different place for the next meeting. So for the first one, just a comment on the data and overbuild policy. We really appreciate Stan's effort to engage with Bikuda from the agenda or the draft that had been in place several months back through the last couple of weeks. Stan and many others that are on this call have contributed to the conversation and kind of where we got to in that policy. I just want to kind of comment a couple highlight things. One is that for Bikuda and the CUDs, some of the underlying thoughts that went into the data policy, and this goes to some of the questions actually, Holly, you had about revising business plans. It's now clear to us that the PSC data and now the FCC data are deeply flawed. And in the moment we're in, we need to be really careful to not let that stall our progress. There's been great progress over the last couple of years in terms of getting grants out, getting construction started. We are in a moment where we have websites at the national and state level that represent things that are not true. And so we need to be very careful to not let that create churn in our process. Specific examples we mentioned last time, hundreds of addresses that say they are served with fiber where there is no new infrastructure on the poles. And again, this data was supposed to be accurate as of December 31st, 2021. So it's not like it's a small miss. We're now 11 months of miss. So again, in the data policy and to the point about the cost to reevaluate, I don't think anyone objects to reevaluating their business plan and keeping it up to date. CDs are doing that every day. That's part of their operations and such. What we want to make sure is that we don't get into a vicious cycle of being forced to evaluate bad data and taking us off plan. And so I think that's what that comment was about. And a lot of the things in the data policy, I think the way Stan ultimately framed them gives the flexibility for using data, being informed by data, making sure we're making data-based decisions, but also recognizing that that data is not perfect right now and that there are other sources that will need to be brought into that. And of course, that ultimately the legislature decided in that 2019-2020 period that the system was broken. And we need to get outside the system to create this public process to assure universal service. So I think that's fundamental, and recognizing the importance of these grassroots community-based organizations that we're committed to universal service. Of course, the efficiency comments are spot on, and I think we agree with you in terms of clarifying some of the further definitions of what that means. So I think that's it. Well, I actually think we talked through many of the issues that you talked through today. The fact that it wasn't self-evident in the draft are probably pretty easy fixes. And so we'll look forward to working with staff on that. I think the second comment today was related to the shared services document. And just to give you a little bit of context of how that started, we, Bikuda, had a conversation with Christine and Rob some months ago about kind of some of the things that Bikuda thought it could do better if we were able to get a jump start on some shared services. And I'll talk about kind of the model that we were thinking. But recall that the CUDs right now are in construction mode, and some of them are starting to realize revenue, but operating dollars are really thin. And so when the opportunity for this grant as a short-term funding vehicle came up, I think we all kind of brainstormed, hey, here's a way you could short fund for a couple of years some resources that would really help us do a good job, perhaps accelerate activities, certainly be more prepared for when the federal auditor does their standard review and asks questions that we need to be prepared for, or when the state does, for that matter, et cetera. And that, so a couple of years out, the CUDs will have a revenue stream. They'll be able to fund continuing those positions which make sense. But right now, we're in a position where operating dollars are short, And so we're short on some resources. The other thing I would say, I think you all talked about this in your conversation, was that there's some things that no CUD would imagine being able to hire on their own at their scale. So for instance, the highly qualified financial expert with federal grant experience, single audit experience, and broadband experience. Like that's a unicorn in itself. Together, we could probably get someone to do that 10 hours a week. And provide an enormous accelerator to our knowledge and development of knowledge and to getting work done as it needs to get done across the CUD. But no, the individual CUDs did not anticipate that. And so the idea there was that VCUDA could find that kind of contractor to serve on behalf of the CUDs and help them get their accounting set up and their asset management and other things in ways that make sense for inevitable future grant programs, as we have to deal with Treasury's rules versus NTIA's rules versus state rules, et cetera. So, I think we can clarify there, as that evolved, it layered on our needs together with VCPP's needs. We just need to do some roles, responsibilities, and clarification there. I'm happy to do that. I think the last thing that I wanted to comment on today was just on going back to mapping, and I know it's the next agenda item. Very high need for us in the next couple of months to get ahead of what's happening with the FCC process. And I encourage you all to go in and put in your home address and put in the address of a few friends and just see what's there. Because like the state data, it presents some challenges in terms of what Vermont's allocation might be in the BEAD program. And we want to do our best effort to get in front of that. That probably means that we need to organize a public relations campaign to get individuals in the state to do a bunch of work over the next couple of months to submit challenges. And so I think that's a very important thing that clearly VCUDA is very interested in seeing. As folks have looked at the broadband data, there are some things that are positive. There are some things that look like they're improvements in the data that are more accurate. I think the Pots and Pans article today pointed out, for instance, that the service area definitions are much more tightly defined for some providers. And so, for instance, you don't see the census block problem anymore on some providers, but you still do on others. So anyway, there's a lot of work to do there to understand that data and make sure that we put Vermont's best foot forward in terms of the federal funding and have the right data for you guys to make decisions about grants. Because it's going to be really tempting to look at that data. It's not accurate yet. So we've got to get that challenge process underway. I think that covers almost everything. Just one comment on the auditors. I think the CDs are obviously interested in seeing both the kind of informal and the formal findings of this first pass. Similar comments. There's no one upset about the idea that we're getting an early review and set of comments from the auditors on the activities. That will benefit everyone, so that's great. But they're eager to see what's in there and to start tackling whatever issues the auditor would like to see improvements on. So one final thing on that is, I think our standard understanding right now is that the accountability that the VCBB has with the CUDs is through the grant agreement. And that, if we want to see, and that would be true of a shared services grant as well, we should be writing great criteria into those grant agreements that's auditable and everyone feels comfortable, prove that the dollars are being spent efficiently and for the best public good. So I don't think there's any objection to that. This group will be eager for, clear guidelines that they can match or overachieve on. So thank you. I think there may have been a couple other people that wanted to share comments today. I don't know if that's still true or not. I don't know if anyone wants to raise their hand. Any of the CDs that are on?
Thank you, Rob. We do have some time, so we can open it up to if there's CUDs that have specific comments. They also have a public comment period as well.
It told me I couldn't raise my hand. I just tried.
Krista.
Yes, it's Krista. Thanks. I just had following up on what Rob was saying, a couple of items to share. One, the question about inventory is a great question in terms of cross grants, and it is something that we're dealing with and have sought expert advice from the top accounting firm in New England on telecommunications. And there is a process through that, and it has to do with when and how you record income. And I mentioned that one to say, yes, there is a solution. It, you know, we can get through that. But also bring it up as an entry into two around the type of services that are needed. You know, we're a large enough organization that I've posted to for a CFO position as a whole, right? And yet we do have some candidates, and I'm certainly not ruling those candidates out since this is public. But there's also some limitations to the experience that they have, or the experience of the candidates that we have gotten. Certainly, nobody is going to bring together the combination of telecommunications plus, you know, substantial grant funding and how that works, plus, you know, municipal issues, et cetera. And so a couple things to combine those previous two comments together is if we create a situation where we have a source and we can create some standardization, and I think Holly mentioned this, and somebody texted me earlier, is Holly channeling your thoughts here, Krista, around the efficiencies that can be brought to bear for not only CUDs, but for the VCBB, for the Public Service Department, for state auditors, for regular auditors. If we can get to the point where we are working from some common information and common reporting that is done based on the way we need our business models to be structured, everywhere from chart of accounts to reports to things like that. So that kind of entity, that kind of person, you know, in my view, and I'm only speaking for myself, but is something that needs to sit inside of VCUDA to be a role for and resource for the CUDs, because you can't have that person providing advice to each of the CUDs and operating at that high CFO level, also be the person that is on behalf of VCBB reviewing their business plan, right? I mean, like, those two things need to be separated. So I just wanted to provide an example of how that could be extremely important and cost effective for us and for the state as a whole. And then the second thing, I will just reiterate maybe even more strongly than Rob did, which is the mapping challenge, which you're about to get into, is this is super nervous about where this is at and what we need to do in order to effectively challenge this and get to where we need to go. So very much looking forward to the next portion of our conversation, or of your meeting, rather. Thank you.
Thanks, Krista. Rob, is there anybody else from the CUD land that wanted to comment during your section?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right, I don't see any other hands up, so let's move along because we all want to get to this, the FCC broadband map town process.
Yeah, I'll kind of tee this up. You know, there's really two components of the broadband mapping challenge. You know, we talk about the PSDA data, you know, in terms of problem solving and all that, but got to remember the PSDA has some of the best data in the country. So when compared to the current FCC maps, there's about a 30% error rate. So that's being worked through right now. And of course, when we talk about PSD data and all these decisions based on that data, this will be an iterative process. You know, we all want to work together to continually improve our confidence in that data. So this subject we're talking about today, the FCC Broadband Mapping Challenge process, is different. It's different in that the FCC has set up a mapping challenge process for the states and individuals to challenge the maps. And this is real money. This is, if you look at the state minimum, there's $42.5 billion out there that's being allocated for infrastructure. If we take the state minimum of $100 million each, that comes up to $5 billion. That delta is going to be based on need. And that need is, that means real money for Vermont. So you've heard this focus, consistent focus that we need to really focus in the next month or so on challenging the FCC data and engaging our public, engaging all the resources we can, because ultimately the additional funding we get beyond that 100 million is going to be determined on the number of underserved and unserved addresses that are in the FCC map. So the context for this discussion is around, we want to maximize the accuracy of the FCC data because we know that that will provide us more grant funding. And so I'm kind of teeing up Karen's presentation. She's going to present to you the FCC Broadband Map Challenge process that we're going to focus on in the near term. So before I turn it over to you, are there any questions as to this item and to why we're
doing it? I think it's important, Christine, that we all get on the same page of what's been presented with the FCC data. I've seen the news report, but we have not had a conversation about this as a group. I saw the map, and the map said Vermont is served. So I think we need to have a little grounding of what has been presented. What has been presented. The FCC says in that map, at least this is what I understand, is that there's more sites in Vermont that are served than what we are looking at relative to what we know as a problem statement here in Vermont. They look at us as we've got service. Yet go on to the next stage. Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, that map assumes satellite, for example, Starlink satellite is coverage. And wireless is included. Of course, we're talking about wireline carriers. So these are all the challenges we have to go to. And maybe, I don't know whether it's Alyssa or Rob, you can explain more detail as to, how that challenge, well, let's go through the challenge process.
Yeah, but I think
and then
get people, Christine, to think about it, to get people to initiate their time to spend saying this map is wrong, you've got to explain why it means something to us.
Well, it means anywhere between $7,500 and $25,000 per address. So if you look at the return on investment, we'll get that exact number. That FCC hasn't given it to us yet, but there's a significant return on investment.
Yeah, I think the message. I mean, we'll look at. I'd like to have Heron go in, but the message is, if we go with the FCC's map, Vermont's going to lose a boatload of money.
Yeah, there you go.
It's simple. Keep it very simple so people can understand.
Yeah, like it. Okay. Go ahead, Heron. Why don't you take it over and do your presentation? As you're prepared for. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, Patty. That's right. It's important to keep in mind what this all means, and it means hundreds of millions of dollars. So I am going to share my screen and try to simplify this for you all. There are two types of challenges. The Fabric Challenge disputes the accuracy of the location data included in the Fabric, and the Availability Challenges challenge the availability data reported from providers. And there are two ways to challenge. Individual challenge, both of these types of challenges, there are two ways to challenge for the Fabric and the availability. Individuals can challenge consumers. Oh, can you not see my screen?
No, we can't see your screen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's a double. You kind of got to do things twice with them.
Okay, let me go back here. I have to click it again. I'm saying share.
Yep, and then you go to your actual presentation and have it show up on your screen. It should show up on ours.
And it should. That's what I thought I did, but I'm sorry. Okay, is it there now?
Nope, not here yet.
Not.
So you click on the up arrow, open the share tray.
I thought I
And
did
then you
that.
click on screen share.
Screen share.
And then you click on your screen one, or I
Sorry.
don't know how many screens you're running, but you click on your screen and then you say, okay, now you got it.
I think I got it. Is that going?
Yes,
Yep.
you're
There
there.
it is.
Shared. Okay. I'm sorry. I'll start over here. Just a few slides. Okay. Two types of challenges. Fabric challenge and availability. Fabric means, and some of this is, I'm sure, a review for many of you, disputes the accuracy of location data included in the fabric. Availability challenges challenge availability data reported from the providers. For both of these types of challenges, there are two ways to challenge: individual challenges and bulk.
Is there a change of screen, Karen, that we're supposed to be seeing? I've only got your initial entry.
Oh, I did change it. That's not, is it? Oh.
Yeah, it's not.
It's
Okay.
not
Not
working.
toggling over.
It's just seeing this and it's not changing.
It's not. We have your introductory screen.
Introductory. Well, and then it's not changing now.
Nope.
Okay.
You may have to click in presentation mode. At the bottom left, you see the 1 of 10. You should be able to click that button on your screen and then it should go.
Let me see. You can see my screen now. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
But it's not going through when I
And
play
now it is. Now it just changed to the second slide.
Okay. Well, maybe I need to just go through it this way if you can see it like this. Okay. So you see the two different types, fabric and availability.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then, so that is what I explained, just the different types, the disputing fabric and disputing accuracy of location data, and availability is obviously challenging the availability data that's reported from the providers. Now, for both of these, there are two ways to challenge as an individual or bulk challenges. Individuals can submit challenges for their homes or their small businesses, and they can be accepted directly from the online map, which I'll show you at the end. The bulk challenge is by governmental entities, service providers, or other third parties, filed directly into the BDC system and must meet certain format of applicable data specification. Now, the individual fabric challenges can include a location that meets Commission's definition of a broadband serviceable location is missing from the fabric. Location's broadband serviceability is incorrectly identified. Information such as the address or unit count is incorrect, or the location's placement, geographic coordinates, is incorrect. For bulk fabric challenges, the entity, this goes over basically what an entity needs to do a bulk fabric challenge, including how to access fabric data, reviewing specifications, methodology, developing strategy, and aligning their data. This information I'm giving you now, too, I know there's a lot of it, is all in your one-pager on the challenge process. Currently, the PSD has filed a fabric challenge based on its finding that 11% of the locations in Vermont aren't recognizable addresses in the state E911 database, and that the fabric omits 22% of addresses in the state E911 database. Moving on to availability challenge, which is kind of where we want to focus here and what we need to get the word out about. Now, this again is saying that the services the map says are available are not available. So these can include provider failed to schedule a service installation within 10 business days of a request. Provider did not install the service at the agreed upon time. Provider requested more than the standard installation fee to connect the location. Provider denied the request for service. Provider does not offer the technology or service type at this location. Reported speed not available for purchase. Subscribed speed not achievable. No wireless or satellite signals available at the location. Or new non-standard equipment is required to connect this location. Now, if you're doing this type of challenge, you need to include evidence and details of a request or attempted request for service, the date, method, content of the request, details of the response from the provider, or evidence such as a screenshot or email showing no availability at the disputed location. Again, why this is important is that it could mean hundreds of millions of dollars that Vermont gets or doesn't get. The other reason this is important for everyone to know about is we can all help. It's pretty simple. It sounds complicated, but it's not complicated. And there's a great website I found from the FCC that's really user friendly that I would like to go to and show you how to get more information and review the information I've given. So the website shows the map. You can just put your address in here, and if you haven't done so already, put your home address in. It'll tell you what they say is provided, and then you can challenge it.
You're gonna have to change what screen you're sharing.
Oh, I'm
You're
not
still seeing
I'm
the
not sharing
presentation,
that
yeah.
screen. I'm sorry.
No
No, I'm
worries.
doing the wrong one. Okay. I was still on that one. All right. I can get there. I thought it would go right to it. Does someone else have the map?
I'm doing it right now.
Are you doing it right now? There's a
It is
video.
doing it.
There is a video on. Let me see if I can see. I'm sorry, I'm not the quickest at this. I don't see where I can share this one. Does someone else? I can put the link in the chat even, but I really wanted to highlight the video. There's a video that's under 2 minutes long that shows you exactly what to do, and it's really simple. When I first saw this, I was thinking I need to put something together, and I saw this and I thought I don't have to put something together because it's exactly what I want to do. But let me give you the link here, Rob, and then you can put it on. Well, it's right here, so
Huh.
I can't, but it doesn't flip my screen, huh? Okay, let me send it.
So the link is in the board packet.
The link is in the packet. I just wanted to put it up here. For this, Rob, maybe you can click through and share it. It's right on that web page and you just scroll down a little bit to get to the map right below it. There's a short video that I think is really helpful. If that would be possible. Do I need to? There you go. That's what I wanted to show. So if we can see the video. It should have a sound to it though as well. Well, it goes through and explains everything we need to do, and we can put the link up definitely, and this is going to be part of what we need to sound. I don't hear the sound.
Rob, you can stop your screen share.
Okay, so that's not going to work.
Well, sorry about that. We will get that out there, and it's a great video. The point is, it explains it. It goes over the information I gave, but it specifically explains what each person needs to do. You put your address in, and you see, what it says, and then it shows you from that screen how you can challenge if there's an issue with what's there. Again, we are starting to get our ideas together for our public relations campaign, and we're going to be getting word out through press release and many other avenues to get people to try to understand how important this is and exactly what you need to do to challenge it.
Oh, Karen, on the website, can you actually test your internet speed via the website, or you do that separately with an internet test?
I'm not sure how you do that. It tells you what they have reported is there, and then if you feel like that's not right, that's where you challenge it. I'm not sure how you test your speed. That I don't know.
I just want to comment that it took me less than 30 seconds to check my house. It was correctly reported, but I happen to live across the green from the town hall, which is correctly reported as an anchor institution, but unserviceable. The fiber goes right past it.
All right, anything else, comments, questions? So Karen and Christine, the game plan is to devise a PR campaign to say, everybody go out and check your location, because this means millions of dollars to the state.
Yeah.
You know, I just encourage, I mean, this is a no-brainer, but I encourage you to keep it simple and impactful as to the message, but you got to keep it simple so people can understand it, or they just won't do it.
Okay.
Okay, let's go back to agenda. I'm not hearing anything else on this challenge process. We are up for public comment.
Could I make a comment about before we move on? The state had a map and was interested in logging in what the service levels were for various households. And I worked with the principal of our local elementary and middle school, and we identified the households of her students, not by name of family, but by address. And we just went through them all and made sure that they were properly registered the last time the PSD gave a grant. A similar way of aggregating this task, like I just reported a challenge to our town hall. It is possible that we might work with the CUDs and use their town representatives to organize this in a more group or aggregated way, in addition to an individual challenge. Thanks.
Thank you.
We have discussed going through CUDs and employing some various methods of really reaching people at the local level in towns and in different ways that we can do this to reach people and different ideas. So we welcome more anybody who has ideas about how to reach more people or a way to tackle this would be welcome.
May I comment on Holly's comment about the areas not being serviceable? This is Roger.
Roger, can we move that to public comment? We're up to public comment next.
Sure.
Well, you can keep your hand up. Okay, we'll catch you at public comment.
All right. Let's move on. Close out the item 8 on our agenda. Let's move to public comment. Rob, can you run public comment for us?
Sure. First up, we have Roger.
Thank you, Rob. Just to comment on Holly's comment about the school not being serviceable, they consider schools and larger companies to be a mass marketed service, so they're listed with a gray dot and not served.
This was our town hall, Roger, and it said it was not serviceable. Would that be a similar category?
So it may say location is not broadband serviceable and would not subscribe to a mass market service.
No, it
So
doesn't. It doesn't
say
have that mass market piece on it.
Okay.
Okay.
Because there are schools that show up and larger businesses that show up, and they specifically say that they should go after dedicated types of services, I think.
I say, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Rob, if you're
Krista,
running.
sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Krista.
Hi. So so what I'm gathering from the presentation is that the proposal is on individual challenges, but I guess I was expecting an approach on bulk challenges and how we can put together that information as a state and get it into place. I think that the individual challenges have their place, and I think it's important, and I agree with the comments about we have to extend this beyond individuals, right? Like getting to school peoples and library peoples. But it seems to me that I understand that we've submitted something in bulk on the fabric. But my understanding is that there's also an opportunity to submit in bulk on other issues. And I'm just wondering if we have any thoughts on that or any plans to try to address that.
Yeah, sorry, I was unmuting my anyway, I was unmuting. We're working with the PSD on the bulk challenge. Rob, can you say a little more about that?
Sure. We've spent the last week getting access to the fabric, and Stone, our GIS consultants, are going to be doing quite a bit of analysis to identify the locations that are the highest priority for a bulk challenge. Basically, we're working on a lot of strategy right now. We will work with the CUDs on strategy. There's could be some advantages to both
Alexa,
the state
office lights on.
and the CUD challenging.
Device office connected to is not responding. Please check its network connection and power
Could
supply.
the Alexa owner mute, please?
Yeah, Rob, your mic is up too. Put your mic down.
Okay, sure. I'm tempted to ask Alexa how we maximize the challenge process, because Alexa may have a better clue than everyone. But we're working on it. We're analyzing it. We're going to be implementing a strategy, and we'll be in touch with the CUDs. But yes, we do plan on doing bulk challenges to addresses that we've identified as not likely to achieve the speeds that are claimed. But we want to make sure we're identifying addresses that are only served at that speed by one provider. So we could waste a lot of time serving addresses that won't move the needle, I guess, is the key thing when it comes to bulk challenges. We are also strategizing on how to get information out to consumers, both on those addresses we identify and on challenging the fabric. There's people that are on this call today that looked up their own address, and according to the FCC, they didn't exist. So we want to make sure if an address isn't included, that it is added as well.
Yeah, and we're also working with other states on this. Like, for example, I've managed to pull up my site, and they show that I'm served, and I'm served by Hughes network, which of course you're never going to work with Hughes, and SpaceX. And of course I'm on satellite, but I certainly don't want to continue to operate on satellite. I want to get fiber, right? It's like, you all know about my kludge system here. So because I've got a kludge system, the FCC thinks I'm served. So.
But we're, as Christine said, we're also working with other states. There's a sign-on letter being drafted that is encouraging the NTIA to release the $100 million minimum that's available to any state and leave more time for the challenge process, because the FCC expects this challenge process, at least this first iteration, to be done by the middle of January. which is entirely unrealistic if the goal is to get accurate maps. So we're working a variety of different angles at this point.
Okay, I think. Keep going, Rob. Stephen John, I think you're next. Go ahead, Stephen.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your work. I just wanted to advise you that our Deerfield Valley Communications Union District, certainly as an executive committee, as an operations committee, we have various committees. We've worked on mapping. We've looked at this. We have some pretty sharp mapping people on our board, and we've looked at the data regarding, large group questions, and we've investigated some of those. We haven't come up with any big, large numbers there, but I do support this idea of people reporting individually. It sort of gives all citizens an opportunity to have a stake in what's going on, or at least be. Now it's another reason for them to get angry with us because we're in charge of this system or something, which we haven't even built yet. So I just want to make sure we aren't too optimistic about what the possibility is of getting even 10% of our population to respond on an individual basis, or 20%. And we decided locally that we didn't have any means to actually question the difference between 20, 21, 22 data on those maps. It's self-reported, and we haven't found any smoking guns, put it that way. Sorry.
Great, Roger, is your hand still up from before, or did you want to speak again?
No, it's new. So how are you looking at these maps? Because when you go in and if you enter the area and you go under technology and say 100/20, Vermont is all blue, as is Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, half of Texas. And that's at 100 or 20 or greater. So in that instance, how are we challenging the statement that we're 98% served?
Well, we're challenging the technology for starters.
Okay.
We don't want to see satellite included. But Rob, why don't you say a few more words about it?
Sure. First off, the NTIA is not going to use. Let me reframe that. The only data the NTIA is going to use to determine whether a location is served is a landline location, so a terrestrial location, and licensed wireless spectrum. Those are the only two. So the first thing you can do is go into the map and filter to only include, I don't know if they say terrestrial or landline and licensed spectrum, but it is one of the options. The chart below doesn't change anything, but the map will change to show that not everything is all blue. So that's really the starting point. From there, we're going to be analyzing sets of locations that are claimed at 25.3. We're going to be using the PSD map to view where there's some discrepancies there. We're going to be using a variety of different tools. We don't want to talk about the strategy until we have a strategy that we're sure that the FCC is going to accept. That's one of the challenges here. There's a lot of the clarity isn't there in terms of exactly what will be accepted as a bulk challenge. There's a webinar happening on Wednesday that we'll be participating in and encourage others that the FCC is running that's going to go into the bulk challenge process. That's why we're a little bit loose on the details right now.
That's fair. So when you hit the gear, then really look at all wired and then licensed fixed wireless and then greater than 25.3, and that's the map that you're really looking at?
That's what we're really looking at. We will still get funds for addresses that are under 120, but anything under 25.3 is considered unserved. Anything under 100 by 20 is considered underserved. So we want to maximize everything that we can in terms of making sure any location that doesn't have 25.3 is accurately reported, and then do the same for the 100 by 20. But I think we're mostly going to find it in the not having access to 25.3.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, Rob V, you're next.
Thanks. I just want to kind of circle back on the point that Krista made and Steve and John as well. I think it's not reasonable to think we're going to get a very high take rate of individual citizens adding up to a lot. And so the idea that we get another round of bulk challenge submitted, I think, is really important. And at first, applaud the PSD and BCBB staff for getting one in. I actually got note today, as someone mentioned earlier in Pots and Pans nationally, that Vermont has done a good job in this first round. But I don't think it's realistic to think the date will slip much beyond the January date. What the FCC, what the NTIA has already done is say they're going to wait till the summer when this next round of data is ready from this review that right now will end in January. Will be based on what the submissions are through January. And as you know, the NTIA is already under enormous pressure to get the funds flowing, and that they've been slow to start. And so, I think we do have to anticipate that our next bulk challenge, which deals with those locations where we know there's not fiber on the poles that's been reported, where we deal with some of the challenges with the 25.3 data reporting, where it's based on the type of technology in place as opposed to the distance that technology serves. And some of those other issues we really need to sort out this month so that we can be in a position in early January to finalize the strategy and get the data submitted. So I just emphasize that. One thought is, this may be after Wednesday's seminar. It might be a great time to have a working group get together. And I think we need some storming activity as a group to make sure everyone is on the same page, and then we got to come up with a strategy. So thank you.
Thanks, Brian. You get to rate because you're a board member. Go ahead.
I just had, is there any way to engage, the major employers in Vermont? Because remember, a lot of this connectivity is so we can enable remote work for employees. And is there any way to get employers involved in the validation process to confirm that because they know who their employees are, they know where they live. And if we could get them to somehow engage to provide the data to confirm or refute that the locations have the connectivity they say they do, is there any way the PSD or somebody could do that rather than trying to have a public campaign where we're asking for individuals to do it themselves, which I think will have a low likelihood of success?
Brian, you mean like a directive from the state of Vermont to its employees?
Well, the state would be one, but what about UVM Medical Center, UVM, all the educational institutions, all the, Mac, all the major employers. I mean, anyone who's got a remote workforce wants to confirm so that there can be billed targeted to where their employees live, I would think. Could the Chamber of Commerce help with that?
I'd be happy to connect us to the Vermont Business Roundtable.
Perfect idea. Yeah, that's a great one, Holly.
Brian, I think all of the above on what you just said.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
I think I'm next. Can I go?
Rob, are you running us?
Go for it. I was, and then Christine was, so I stepped aside. So I
Okay.
wanted to make sure everybody was done. But yes, Krista is up next, I believe. I still have hands up, but I think they're old hands.
I love the idea of engaging employers in the process as well, as things like school systems and et cetera. And also, if we create a methodology of doing it, then the CUDs can, leverage our governing board and our grassroots to sort of help in that regard in terms of getting the word out on the individual side. On the bulk side, and I realize that there's a lot of work that I understand now that there's a lot of work that's going on and that we don't necessarily have all of the information out. So I'm just expressing what I'm most concerned about trying to address, which is the wireless spectrum holders. You know, for a decade, the Northeast Kingdom hasn't been able to get federal funding because of VTEL's Wireless WOW project. And you know, while they're no longer a protected borrower from USDA, and so we now have the ability to go after those grant funds, that impact is still being seen. And I'm not clear that an individual challenge process is going to really address that very much. I mean, you know, maybe hopefully we get some people that actually have VTEL that are responding, and maybe that gives us some sense of where they're at. But realistically speaking, wireless technology, A, is dependent on how many people in the area are taking it, and B, it isn't being used by the people that can't get it, and therefore how can they challenge it because they can't show what they have because they don't have it because it's not operable. So I don't know what the answer to this solution is, and we really are relying on the VCBB and Stone and whatnot to come up with this, and I just want you to be aware that that's the biggest piece that we really don't know how to address. Thanks.
Laura, you're up.
Yeah, I will just connect to Krista's comment, the phrase self-attestations.
So Laura, what do you mean by that?
So that's the requirement. Tell us, you know, a test that you're serving.
But you know, that can be done in a bulk way, Laura, so you can get more done. Because those, you can attest for other addresses for which you have the information.
I mean, these and entities like VTEL.
I'm not following, so. Yeah, you're saying if you have service and you want to check it out, you can check what the carrier has reported.
Right. I'm saying that the attestations of these companies.
You went on mute, Laura.
That's what the whole conversation is, that these are not reliable attestations.
Right. How do we challenge the attestation? How do we get the information through all those nooks and crannies? Or how do we, is there a way to do it that isn't nooks and cranny basis? Is there a way to look at more accurate propagation technology or some other mechanism that can demonstrate that what they're demonstrating is highly unlikely?
I encourage everybody to stay tuned and watch the FCC thing on Wednesday. So we're going to all learn a lot there.
So Christine, this is Patty. Based on this conversation, it just begs for a discussion of VCBB staff to devise a plan of the challenge process through VCBB. So let's put that on for the agenda for next month. You're on mute, Christine. So we can't hear you. You heard us, so let's move that to have.
Hang on. I just want to say, sorry, that's technology problem here. But we've got a tentative plan in place. We want to make sure Wednesday is the FCC is going to give us some more guidance. So I think, the next meeting is very appropriate in terms of talking about what we're going to be doing.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, any more on public comment?
That appears to be anybody, everybody, unless there's anybody on the phone that can't raise their hands. If you are on the phone, please speak up.
Yeah, Laura, you still have your hand up. I don't know what
That's a mistake.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's everybody.
Okay, let's close public comment. Let's move on to parking lot.
Yeah, let me pull that up. Actually, Rob, could you pull up the parking lot for me? Because I don't have it on my other computer.
Sorry, I'm not ready. It's going to take a few moments.
Yeah. It's in the board packet. Anyway, I'll start down the parking lot while Rob's pulling it up. But yeah, so we're talking about the mapping and strategy. Tentative plan. Well, obviously, future meeting in January is not going to work. We're going to do that next week, next meeting. We thought we had more time with the FCC, but we don't. So I will revise that to say we're going to present a strategy at our December meeting. We will invite the delegation to the January board meeting. Post workshop, December 7th. That's scheduled. Enforceability. We kind of talked about this. You know, we've got to come up with accountability enforceability plan, and we'll present that at the future board meeting. Rob, could you scroll down? Subsequent overbuild policy, we talked about that today. Placeholder for a budget update. Yeah, we're going to present that in January. We talked about that at the last meeting. Adjustment timing of board packet. We'll plan to start that schedule in January. Data set policy, we talked about that today. Patty's working on the mission statement. Communication procedure for the board, we presented that today and had that approved.
Yeah, Christine, on the mission statement, plan for that for the next meeting of the 12th.
Okay.
I'll have material out for you to put in the packet.
Okay. Where was I? Discussion regarding development of a separate website. Oh, we could recommend that we don't develop a separate website. We continue the current website, follow state protocols. It's just going to be way too much work to do a separate website when trying to deal with this. You know, we're under the we are under the PSD. So that's what we have.
Yeah. Any comments on the parking lot? All right, hearing none. Agenda, what else do we have? All right, the date of our next meeting is December 12th. There's a few topics that we already discussed today, the FCC challenge, strategy plan, mission statement. Christine, do you know of anything else that's going to be up for next week or next 2 weeks?
I'm sorry, I was distracted by text.
Do you know of any other agenda items for the meeting on the 12th?
Well, of course, we're going to talk to the FCC challenge process, and we're going to also finalize the data policy.
And the NBRC grant.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll have to discuss that where we are. I wouldn't commit that to the next meeting, but let's keep that as an optional.
Okay.
We have to get, okay.
All right. So let's.
Is the 12th the only meeting in December? Because 2 weeks later would be the 26th, which I imagine would be low attendance.
Right. My understanding is the 12th is the only meeting in December.
Great, thank you.
Rob and Christine, do you confirm?
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to note, Patty, for you that I have a doctor's appointment that day that I couldn't move, so
Okay.
I might be a tad late.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's go into the agenda really quickly here. Give me a second, make sure I've covered everything. All right, that's all I have on the agenda for today. Unless anybody objects, I'm going to put a motion to adjourn up.
Second.
Excellent. Any discussion?
Just want to say, great meeting, actually. Thanks.
Thank you, staff. Great meeting indeed. Okay,
Yeah,
everyone,
thank you.
see you in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.